Hello again. This is David Stringer, publisher of Prescott E-News, with another segment of Prescott Talks. We are honored again today to have Marc Victor in our studio. Marc was in recently, and we did a show about the philosophical underpinnings of libertarianism. Marc is the Libertarian candidate for the United States Senate. Today, we'd like to talk a little bit about the specific issues in this campaign that are of concern to voters that have come up in previous in media reports and other debates among the candidates. So we'd like to get to some concrete issues and explain how libertarian thinking informs those issues and Marc Victor's position on those issues. So Marc, let me welcome you today to Prescott E-News. Thanks for coming back and doing another show with us. And let's just start out from the top. As you know, there are some really hot button issues this year. And you've been on at least one debate that I know of, the Clean Elections debate, and on the same stage with Blake Masters and with Mark Kelly. So you're familiar with their positions on these issues. Today, I'd like to give you an opportunity to explain to the voters here in Yavapai County what your position is on some of these issues. So let's just start with one of the issues that is of concern not just here in Arizona, but concern nationally, and that's border security, illegal immigration. Marc, what is your position on this? Do you think it's a problem? Do you think our border is out of control? Do you think that we should do anything to bring it back in control? I know there have been libertarian folks in the past who've said, well, we should just have open borders and let the free migration of labor and that kind of thing. Where does Marc Victor stand on this issue of border security here in Arizona?
Well, David, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the question. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time on this issue, right? I think we need a comprehensive overhaul of our entire immigration policy. I rather like the policies that we had in this country back before we even had a phrase illegal immigration, when it was just immigration. I'm thinking late 1800s, early 1900s, when most of our families came here and it wasn't a problem. You know why it wasn't a problem? Because we didn't have a welfare state. So when people came, what they got was the right to pursue their happiness. Should we stop them at the border? Absolutely. Nobody's got a right to aggress. We should stop them at the border, which means, of course, there's a problem. Of course, we got a disaster at the border right now. We got to fix it. Maybe we need a wall. Maybe there are other ways we can do it less expensive. But however, we need to get control of our international border. But once we've got control of our border, the question is why? What are we doing? Well, we'll stop them. If you're coming here to aggress, if you're a bad guy, sorry, you don't get to aggress because that violates the libertarian principle that we talked about earlier, or what I now call the live and let live legal principle. Let's try to keep the bad guys out and let the other people in. There's a way to do this where it's reasonable, it's rational. We can't just open the floodgates, right? And I think then once they get here, they shouldn't be entitled to live at the expense of other people. And I think a lot of people have legitimate gripes here, right?
Let's, Marc, and I apologize for interrupting, but in the interest of getting right to the key issue here, the core issue, let's get down to specifics.
Okay.
Let's talk about a Central American, maybe 18, 20 years old, probably has a second grade, fourth grade education in Guatemala or Honduras or wherever he's from, no jobs, living in poverty. Does he have a right to immigrate to the United States?
Well, I don't know if I'd say he has a right to immigrate, but if he shows up, we stop him. We say, who are you? Are you part of Al-Qaeda? Are you coming here to detonate bombs?
Well, what kind of standards would you use to vet people, if you will, and determine what does our economy need? What does our culture need? What are the rights of the people that are here already? Do they have any rights to control the influx and what's going to influence the culture and the demographic makeup of our country? Could you speak to those concerns?
The only legitimate reason to not let someone enter our country is because they're coming to aggress. They could be coming to aggress because they're trying to set up a bomb or something like, or maybe they've got a horrible disease. That could be aggression as well. But if they're not in that box, welcome to America. We got such a labor shortage here and so many people who want to work. That's why these people are coming here in the first place. I've been representing them for 28 years. I'm not saying everybody who comes is not a bad guy. We got some bad guys. Let's try to keep them up. But if they're coming here to work, can you drive a truck? Can you work in a restaurant? Can you work in the fields? Welcome to America. We need cheap labor. We need younger workers. We have a demographic problem as well. We have aging population. We need more younger workers. This is a win. These are consumers. These are people who buy things. They shop at businesses. When they came in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they helped grow the economy. It's a good thing.
So, Mark, what do you say to people who point out that very prosperous countries, some of the most prosperous countries in the world, Denmark, Japan, Sweden does allow some immigration, but many, many countries that have, Switzerland, many countries that have very advanced economies, they're very prosperous, they're getting along terrific, they have virtually no immigration, or it's very, very difficult to immigrate to those countries. So is open borders, or is because you didn't say open borders.
I did not say open borders.
You did not say it. No. I apologize. I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but this kind of, I would say, receptiveness to large numbers of people who are just looking for economic opportunity and to improve their lives, that sounds like you would be welcoming to those people. What do you say about people who say, but many of the countries that have very high standards of living and much more orderly societies than we have, much less crime, much less welfare, what do you say to those people in terms of, is immigration really a great value?
Well, what makes us the number one biggest economy in the world is trade. Trade is how we raise standards of living. When there are more people who are part of the economy, we have more people to trade, right? People who come here, they buy goods, they use services, they work, because otherwise there's no reason to come unless you're coming for a welfare state, which I oppose. So if people are coming here to trade, the way we get rich is by having more and more trading with other people.
I think I get your point here, but the countries with the biggest populations, and if you kind of follow the logic of that, why doesn't India then have the biggest economy and the best economy in the world? Why doesn't China have the highest standard of living in the world? They've got the most people.
There are good reasons for that. The reasons they don't have that is because they have restrictions on trade. Wherever you look around the world, if you want to look at Hong Kong, you want to look at Singapore and ask yourself, why do they live better there than they do where my wife is from in Myanmar, a third world country? Similar cultures. One of them has a free market, more free market, the other one doesn't. Why did West Germany do better than East Germany? Why is the Soviet Union gone and the United States of America still here? Capitalism in free market, in trading with other people. If you want to increase standards of living, that's how you do it. There's some excellent books on this, by the way. Matt Ridley wrote a book called The Rational Optimist, Enlightenment Now, written by Steven Pinker, professor from Harvard. Both of those books present a very optimistic picture of not just capitalism, but really the world generally, as long as we don't blow each other up. And I think we're in danger of things like that.
Let me ask you about a specific issue that's actually, there's a ballot proposition this year. It refers to the DACA folks. What is your position on DACA? If you go to the United States Senate, you're going to be voting very likely on what do we do with the DACAs. I think most people agree that there is some kind of a troubling moral issue about deporting or denying citizenship to people who were brought here as very, very young children. On the other hand, if we legalize them and give them citizenship, we open the door to chain migration and all different kinds of problems. So how would you have, this is a tough issue even for very conservative people like myself who are maybe less receptive to a lot of immigration. It's a troubling issue. How does Marc Victor respond to this DACA dilemma?
This issue doesn't bother me a bit. Kids that were brought to this country did absolutely nothing wrong, so long as they're not aggressing. If they are otherwise law-abiding, which means they're part of our culture, they're part of our community, they're buying, they're selling. And I've represented people in these positions where they've been ordered to go be deported back into a country that they don't speak the language, they don't have relatives. This is a huge injustice. I am absolutely not in favor of tearing families apart. This is un-American. We are a pro-immigrant nation. And as long as they're not breaking the law, which means they're not aggressing, why on earth would we send productive people out of the country? I'll go a step further with you, and let's talk about the people who came here illegally and who are now otherwise living good lives. I recognize they broke the law. I still don't want to tear families apart. If they are otherwise law-abiding, give them a path to citizenship.
So, Marc Victor, with respect to the ballot proposition, and I don't really mean to be putting you on the spot, but I am, Marc Victor says, yes, in-state tuition for DACAs.
I didn't say that.
But, all right, so what would you say? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of giving state benefits really to anybody for anything. I think we need to devolve away from the notion that the government takes money from you and me against our will and then spends it on things, even important good things. I want to get those things done as well, but I want the owners of the money to decide where the money goes. That's what freedom is about. The other is just socialism, right? We're going to take people's money against their will and then argue about where we're going to spend it. We got to get out of this mess or we're going to be fighting about it forever. So I don't want to give anybody state benefits. Nobody has a right to live at the expense of another person. I recognize we got a big mess right now, so we have to very smartly, reasonably, rationally transition from that.
So you're not an automatic yes to the in-state tuition.
That's right. I'm not an automatic yes.
All right, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Let's move on to another issue, and of course, and that's the economy and inflation. Most of the people watching this video are going to remember it was just 2 years ago when we had a pretty strong economy, and inflation had been, we had a lid on inflation, I think, for the last 3 or 4 decades. And suddenly we have huge inflation that many people have never had that kind of inflation in their lifetime. And we are now, there's talk of, inflation risks and things like that. What do you say to that? What, if you go to Washington, if you go to the United States Senate, what is the Victor plan to get things straightened out with respect to our economy?
Yeah, the Victor plan is always pushing freedom and peace and civility. We've been building towards this kind of a financial problem for decades now. I think it's unfair to just blame it on the D's. I think you can blame it on the R's as well. As I said in the debate, president after president, administration after administration, doesn't matter who's controlling the mechanisms of power. We're getting more spending, we're getting more debt, we're getting more regulations across the board. This is not the right direction for our country. What I would do is support every opportunity to cut taxes for every person, every business. We need to cut them dramatically. I would like to get them much lower than they are now. Same with spending.
Right. So President Trump lowered taxes. I don't believe the Biden administration has been able to reverse those tax cuts in any meaningful way. Would you support maintaining those tax cuts and maybe even cutting further?
Yes, I support all tax cuts. I want to cut them much further, but I think we need to be fair and honest about what happened in the Trump administration. Sure, he cut taxes. Yes, I saw this as a little dinky tax cut. I want much more serious tax cuts, but also he increased spending. I think cutting taxes while increasing spending and throwing more onto the debt, as President Trump did, is the wrong thing to do. I want to cut the debt, I want to cut spending, and I want to cut taxes. And the way you do that is you chop down the welfare state and you bring forth more of a free society where the owners of the money, I have a radical idea that if you earned it, what's the fair amount of money you should keep? All of it.
So, Mark, if you are in January of 2023, if Marc Victor is in the United States Senate, you will vote for tax cuts and you will not support, correct me if I'm misstating your position, you will not support any more big spending bills from the Biden administration.
There's no question about that. But to be fair about it, the way these bills come through, right, they're a big giant package of a whole bunch of things. If it was up to me, I would want to radically cut spending, radically cut taxes, and get rid of all the unnecessary regulations, and there are many of them. But that's not the way bills present, right? You've got some good things and some bad things. The way I would analyze it is I would look at it and say, on balance, is this more pro live and let live, which means get us in that direction, or is it more anti live and let live? And you have to make a judgment about that because you get these pork infested bills. So I will always act from the same principles. I am always in favor of freedom and peace and civility.
One of the reasons that much of the Biden administration's spending proposals have been curtailed or watered down is because of the filibuster rule that has been upheld by our other U.S. Senator, Kyrsten Sinema. And how do you feel about that? Would you support the filibuster rule? Would you work with Kyrsten Sinema? How would that play out for us?
I understand the pros and cons, but to me, this is playing games. I'm not a game player. What I want to do is change hearts and minds. If you really want to get things changed, instead of tinkering with filibuster rules, so we got to get 60 senators instead of 51, I think what we should do is really win hearts and minds. And what I want to do is go from office to office and take some of these senators and get them one-to-one and get them in a corner and get them to be more pro-live and let live. I'll get some of them for sure. But what we need to do is get the people watching and listening to this show and everybody else. Our brothers and sisters need to think differently about doing what we've been doing. We need to devolve power away from a big, strong federal government and back down to the individual. It doesn't mean we don't need the government or things like that, but I think you should be the unapologetic, iron-fisted dictator of your body, your money, your property, and your time, period.
Right. Now
no exceptions.
We have time for one more issue, and we're going to touch on probably the most emotional issue, I think, that's arisen in recent times, and that is the abortion issue. We had the Supreme Court overruling Roe v. Wade. Many people misunderstand what happened there. The Supreme Court didn't say that abortions are illegal. They just turned the issue back to the states.
Right.
And so that issue is not going away. It really hasn't been resolved. It's going back to the states. Arizona's going to have to make up its mind about what to do. There's been litigation going on right now. But in terms of a federal rule, President Biden, I believe, has said that he is going to seek to put into statute the principles of Roe v. Wade. What if you're back in the Senate in January? What's your position going to be?
Well, let me first say this is a very difficult issue. Right? I think we should acknowledge there are reasonable minds, really, on this case, on this issue, on both sides, right? On all sides, because there are many different positions here. I would encourage people to look at the very nuanced position I have on my website. They should go to liveandletliverevolution.com, click on the issue, see what I say about abortion. But in a nutshell, the crux of the issue is, when do we afford legal rights to this unborn baby or fetus, depending on your position? That's the whole issue. It's not about when does life begin. Life begins at conception. That's a science question. And so I'm in favor of letting the local community decide from amongst the reasonable choices here.
And by local community, you don't mean the state, you mean something much more closer to the grassroots.
And
you
the reason I
local
like
communities.
Yes, the reason I like cities and towns deciding this issue is because this is going to get market forces on the project, right? If you don't like the rule that City X comes up with, you can move to City Y pretty easily. You can refuse to do business in City X if you like that. And so now we got a little bit of market forces, and eventually we may coalesce around one or two rules or even get it back to the state level.
Mark, you're not concerned that that's going to create a patchwork that's going to be very impractical and very awkward for people to comply with? Prescott Valley decides to do one thing, Prescott does another, Chino Valley does a third thing. You're not concerned that that kind of a patchwork is going to be a problem?
People don't understand we have different city codes right now with different rules.
But on an issue like abortion?
I don't think the people in Prescott Valley are going to write a completely different statute than the people in Prescott. Probably they're going to get together and say, hey, look, they wrote a pretty good statute in Prescott. That's the one I think we're going to adopt. I predict you're probably going to see 2, 3, 4 initially, something like that. And then they're going to coalesce based on market forces. But to be complete on this, I don't think and wouldn't allow any city or town ever, under any circumstances, to outlaw abortion in the case of rape. I think this can be independently justified. In the case of health of the mother, I think that can be independently justified. So I'm only talking about allowing abortion in cases that are other than those cases. And I'll say this, if this is happening post-viability, I think that even sort of steel manning the argument on the pro-life side, you don't get to kill, or the pro-choice side, you don't get to kill the baby after it's removed. You might think of this more as an eviction than an abortion. So if we can keep the baby alive, we should keep the baby alive. So what does this mean? Anytime after viability, we could call it abortion, but that's not really what I'm talking about, right? You take the baby out, give it to...
You mean like an induced miscarriage or something like that?
Give it to the adoptive parents. And I'll note that as our technology gets better and better, this point of viability is moving earlier and earlier. And when this hits the moment of conception, this whole issue will go away. Because if you're a pregnant woman and you don't want to be pregnant anymore, take the fetus out. We'll keep the fetus alive.
You think, Mark, there's enough prospective adoptive parents to take care of all the children that might end up in this situation?
I feel very comfortable. We've got enough virtuous people in our country who are going to say, you know what, I'm really happy that this baby is not being killed. Let's make sure he or she finds a good home. I don't have any question about that.
Well, I can see that you're not just a libertarian, but you're an idealist. So thank you. I appreciate your candor on that.
I think we need to shoot for the right principles. I think we need to put some morality back in our society. I think we've drifted. Nobody's talking about morality. I'm talking about morality, but I'm talking about it only as going outside of the law. I think that's a very important point.
I appreciate your candor on that issue. Mark, we are out of time again, unfortunately, but I want to give you a minute or so at the end of this segment to kind of connect with the voters and tell the voters in a nutshell, make the case for Marc Victor.
Look, here's my ask here. Don't just write me off as a third party. Are you tired of the same old two-party system? I am. Do you think we need to actually do something different? Give me an opportunity to win, not just your vote, but your heart and your mind for a big project called the Live and Let Live Global Peace Movement. Check out my political site, liveandletliverevolution.com. Check out the big project, the Global Peace Movement, liveandletlive.org. Join the movement, blast it out to your friends. Let's change the world together.
Mark, thank you so much. One more point I wanted to make is you are not running clean elections. Can people contribute financially to your campaign?
Sure, they can. They go to liveandletliverevolution.com.
All right, we've got the contact information up on the screen, so anybody that wants to reach out and help you, get a sign, write you a check, that opportunity is there.
I want their heart and their mind and help spread the message.
Terrific.
Let's
Mark,
change the world.
Thank you so much for coming in. This is David Stringer, publisher of Prescott E-News. I want to thank Marc Victor for coming in and telling us about his libertarian thoughts on these hot button issues, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.